I think this drive holds the answers to a lot of questions.
What kind of questions?
Like why Halston's wife went out of clean? What happened to George? Why Johnson Marnes were killed?
They were what?
Yeah, they were murdered.
The things you don't know. In Silo's 8th episode, we learn the rest of the story of what happened to Juliette's mother, Hanna. Jules has spent the last 20 years angry at and separated from her father because she didn't know the truth about what was really going on. You come to realize where her ill feelings for her father came from through a series of flashbacks. After her brother's death, her father dealt with the loss by withdrawing and spending too much time at work. The grief put her mother on a dangerous path searching for answers, and she stopped caring about what lines she had to cross to get them. Because they're unaware of the cameras that spy on everything the citizens of the silo do, her mother was led to believe that her husband must have outed her to Judicial for building a magnifier. This lack of information led to her suicide and Jules running away to Mechanical. By this point in the first season, it's hard not to see the parallels between what happened to Hanna, what will happen to Allison years later, and what is currently happening to Jules. As much as Dr. Pete Nichols hoped that leaving his daughter in Mechanical might lead her in another direction, one that was concerned with fixing things in the real world that were right in front of her rather than chasing after answers, it's clear to both of them by the time she tells him about the cameras and they reconcile that she's on the same path as her mother was 20 years ago. This is a huge revelation for the character and for the way we understand how she fits into the larger picture, and it's not even the biggest reveal in the episode. It becomes a full circle moment when we find adult Jules back on the farming level where she learns that Sims has been answering to Bernard in IT the whole time. He lays out the opposing point of view here and underlines what people like Jules are up against when they go looking for the truth. He says, "Throughout our entire existence, problems have arisen that must be taken care of. The need of the many require the sacrifices of the few. This is about survival, and that hard drive threatens the lives of everyone in this silo, and you were the greatest threat to our home in 140 years. Well, you were." And that perfect line delivery from Tim Robbins sets things up for the final 2 episodes of the season. So how did we get here? The last episode ended with the Raiders closing in on Jules, who had just been named the last Flamekeeper by Gloria. Of course, she got out in time and was able to hide behind a desk in the nursery where she knows there are no cameras to give away her location. Sims goes looking for her, and we learn that he has a history with Gloria. She remembers she helped him and his wife conceive. They were having issues, she gave them some folic acid, and they were able to have their son. While he seems legitimately thankful for that, he doesn't have a problem with threatening to leave her in the medical ward unmedicated for the rest of her life. That turns out to be enough. She gives him the information he's after, and when he calls in the nurse, he tells her to give her the good stuff for every dose from now on, and he thanks Gloria. The only pushback she offers is asking if he really thinks that they'll win, and he responds to that by saying that they have to. Elsewhere, Jules tries to hook up the hard drive to one of the computers and can't get in. Billings calls her and tells her that she needs to get back to the office. And when she gets there, she finds Judicial tossing the place. This is all expertly cut with those flashbacks to her childhood, which does a good job of showing how these cycles of control persist over the years. Hanna didn't want other families to have that same feeling of loss that she experienced. Juliette can't bring herself to believe that George killed himself, and these things make them a threat to the order that relies on strict control of information. As sheriff, Jules does have some power, though, through the pact, and Billings explains how they can use that against Judicial and their illegal search. They go to Sims's office where he's berating his guy for bringing back useless office supplies. He tries to pass off the blame for the search to Meadows, which Jules no longer believes after going to see her, and then she informs them that they're there to arrest him, with Billings there to back her up with his knowledge of the pact, which earns him some razzing from Sims. After they take him away in cuffs, Jules searches his office. And in the back of one of his drawers, she finds a pile of hidden folders where we see Shirley's name, Walker, and her mother. And when she looks inside her mother's file, she sees a person of interest surveillance report. And if you look closely, you see that it's talking about activities related to relics, a magnifying device. You see that she is a surgeon, which I guess isn't that big of a surprise since she was operating on the rabbit. But I believe in the book she was a nurse, so that's a little bit of a change. She turns the page to see something that we don't. That literally makes her raise her eyebrows, and then she goes to see her father. They have the conversation about what really happened with her mother after her brother died. This is where they reconcile, and she lets him know about the cameras, and she decides to go visit Walker to see if she can get into the hard drive. When she hits the staircase, she realizes Judicial has set up checkpoints where they would look through her bag, so she has to come up with a different plan. We see Sims in the holding cell testing out the guard, seeing what he can get away with. He doesn't seem to be all that worried about being locked up. He even has to use a radio, but the deputy draws the line there, even though he asks if that's all right at the end of telling him no. It's a pretty good example of how people relate to Judicial, even people who are in prominent positions like deputies. And I guess I should mention that this episode sort of cleared up a little bit more about how things work. In the last episode, I wasn't 100% sure where the raiders came from, but here we see that they are an integrated part of Judicial. I don't know what that means as far as them being related to the people behind the door in janitorial, like how many people in Judicial know what's going on there. I think it's probably a small amount. But the way that he says, don't worry about it, I won't hold it against you here when he's talking to this deputy, really reinforces the idea that he's not all that worried about what Jules is doing. We also see Billings return home and see that his hand locks up when he's trying to carry the plates to the dinner table. His wife is concerned. She thinks the stress is making the syndrome worse. He explains that Jules put him in a position where he had to choose between her and Sims, which from her point of view isn't even a choice. And she mentions that people around the silo are all saying that she's laying the groundwork for another rebellion. Down in Mechanical, we see that Walker does get the message from Pete, but then we see the clock and realize that Juliette's already over an hour late. We see Walker go to her door and she looks outside calling out to anyone that will help her. And briefly, when she doesn't get an answer, it looks like she's about to face her agoraphobia, but then Shirley appears at the last minute so that she doesn't have to step outside. Up top, we see that Lucas is in the cafeteria again, and he gets a message from a porter that says, might have answers to W and more. Talk now at 6:13. We get a quick flashback here that reminds us that the W is a reference to the conversation he had with Jules about the constellation Cassiopeia. That tells him this message is from her, so he heads to her apartment. When he gets there, the mirror is covered, and she turns on the water and asks him about the hard drive. He explains that sysop is for, like, the head of IT, but that she would be able to access it in her office, which doesn't help her because she can't go there. Because of that, she asks him to help her get around it, and she tells him that she thinks the drive holds the answers to a lot of questions. He's reluctant. He's a good citizen after all, and she just starts unloading all of this information on him. He can't really catch up, he's not really feeling it, and he's also not feeling that she dropped George's name in there. She pressures him, saying that he's there every night wondering what's out there, and he counters that the rules apply to everyone. In desperation, she smashes her mirror so that she can pull out the camera and show it to him. He's obviously quite surprised. He says these are in our homes, and she says they're everywhere, and adds, if we don't figure out the truth, no one else will, so please help me. There is a ticking clock here. She knows that raiders are on their way, so when he falters again, she just runs off. He goes out the other way, and he sees Judicial arrive to start pounding on her door. Jules attempts to skip the checkpoint and gets held up, and that's when Bernard appears to help her get through. She starts to tell him that Meadows isn't the one who's trying to take over, it's actually Sims, and he tells her they can't speak there, so they go to the farm, and while he's asking her what it is that they're looking for, He makes the mistake and mentions the hard drive, and then you see Sims come up behind her. Then it happens. Bernard says, "Did you say you want to go outside?" And very quickly, Sims is there to back him up. Sims checks her bag and recovers the hard drive, and reminds her that he told her she would regret arresting him. In the down deep, Shirley tells Walker the news that Jules asked to go outside, which she doesn't believe since she was on her way to meet her there. Shirley says something about Knox saying that they would punish them for the rebellion, but she never believed it, and then she asks Walker what happens next. On their way up the stairs, Jules tries to get Billings to help her, saying that she never said she wanted to go outside. He tells her that she can request a hearing, and then she points out the obvious, that if she did that, it would be with Judicial, which is run by Sims, and that sets him off to the point where he punches her in the stomach. After that, she notices Billings' hand shaking because of the syndrome, and she sees that as an opportunity and she breaks free. She grabs the bag with the hard drive off of Sims as she pushes past him, and then she jumps over the railing as it cuts to black. I suppose this is a cliffhanger in a sense. It's not really a question of whether she'll survive, but more, what will she do if she gets away? Everything that we've been seeing is that these people that are behind the door in janitorial have pretty tight control over everything. Bernard and IT are involved. Meadows doesn't really have any power, but she's willing to put her name on anything that they want. And if this episode did anything, it showed that the position of sheriff and the sheriff's office in general doesn't have any real power. It's just a position that someone holds, while the real people who are in control run everything from behind the scenes. That said, this was a fantastic episode. As I've mentioned several times in my coverage, what I was hoping the TV show would do in this process of adaptation was flesh out the characters more. After all, that's what serialized TV is made for. I think they pulled that off with Jules, and with the aid of some powerful performances, you really feel that when she tells her father she knows she was wrong to blame him for all those years. This is an emotional moment that stands on its own, but it also reinforces the ideas that they're playing with as they present us with these mysteries that we try to work our way through. This episode was the first one that Adam Bernstein directed. His is a name I know because he directed 2 of my favorite Breaking Bad episodes, Season 3's No Half Measures and Season 4's Box Cutter. I think the direction has been consistently good throughout this first season, but because it's a recognizable name, I paid attention to the details a little more than usual, and I just have to say they do a tremendous job of making the silo feel real. The way I understand it, the set is basically 3 floors of the staircase that they built out, with a few of the levels built in the background. When they need it to look like different levels, they drop blue screens all around and then add that other stuff digitally. The bookended shots of the farm levels here really show off what they've been able to do because it all just kind of works. I feel so relieved that they finally delivered the Bernard reveal. I wasn't sure if they were going to swap his role from the book with Sims, and I'm glad they didn't. His role turns out to be the same, but they presented him in a different way. And to that I say that they actually made him a much better character in the show. In the books, he's abrasive, antagonistic, and completely unlikable from the start, and you know that he's up to no good. Like, there's no question about it. Of course, getting Tim Robbins to play the role doesn't hurt, even if his status might have led some non-book readers to guess that there was more going on with this character, especially in a situation where it felt like somebody was above Sims. And I like the way they're delivering this in that you really don't know now if there's even someone above him or so on. And I think it was always kind of up in the air. Because Jules started to trust him, you couldn't tell for sure, and the way he pulled the wool over her eyes makes him a lot more compelling. Plus, they managed to efficiently express why the people in charge don't see anything wrong with what they do. The idea of doing it for the good of the silo, the idea of the sacrifices of the few so the many can survive. Even though you don't agree with what they do, you can understand how people could resort to a little murder here and there if they believed it was for the greater good, if they believed it was essential for survival. Speaking of pulling the wool and generally interesting character work in service of driving the theme, Billings really is becoming a great character in his own right. His lying about having the syndrome is another example of trying to control information because you think you know better. And I love how that's completely antithetical to the image he projects to everyone. And besides that one thing, he does come off as a character that has his heart in the right place, which makes it all rather complicated. We're getting close to the end, and it's really difficult to see how Jules could turn the tables from where she's at. She does have the hard drive, but we mostly know what's on that thanks to George and Allison. It has been a while, so in case you forgot, if you say you want to go outside, that's what you get to do. And I don't see a situation where Bernard and Sims being the witnesses to her saying it wouldn't be enough based on what the show has presented. This is all quite a bit different than the book at this point, but I will say after this week it does feel like it's going to the exact same place. I thought there was a possibility that they might swerve or switch things up, but that seems less likely to me now. One sequence I didn't talk about was the final flashback where Jules is hurt because no one attended her mother's funeral. This was interesting because of the effect it had on her emotionally, but also how it highlights the stigma that's attached to not keeping your head down and following the rules. That's pervasive, especially in a culture that's closed like the silo. Jules calling them cowards and then sending the rabbit away made me think about the contrast of the time she spent with George. At that point, she seemed pretty comfortable. She couldn't understand why he would risk so much for the relics. Now we know a little bit more. We know that there were seeds planted there from an early age for her to go looking for answers about what happened to him, and her leaving Mechanical to finish what she started with Holston makes even more sense. Where is that going to take her? I guess now she's gotten more than she bargained for, and I can't wait to see what happens next. There are 2 more episodes to go, and they did officially announce that the show has been renewed for season 2, which is good news. And I think that is a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.